They sold me to pay his debts. I made sure they lost everything. The night I finally understood what my family thought I was worth, I was standing in a hospital stairwell at 11:30 p.m., legs shaking from carrying files up 22 flights of stairs, babies growing in my belly, and a text on my phone from my mother that read, "Oldly gave 200,000. You're marrying him tomorrow." I was 2 months pregnant, interning under the most respected neurosurgeon in the city, and my mother, the woman who had raised me since I was found on the side of a road, had just sold me to a 50-year-old man to pay my brother's gambling debts. She didn't ask. She didn't warn me. She announced it the same way you'd announce the weather. I took a photo of that text. I still have it. It's the first thing in the folder I eventually built. And that folder, let me tell you, became the most satisfying document I have ever assembled in my entire life. My name is Melissa. And this is the story of how I learned what I was really worth, and made absolutely certain everyone else learned it too. Let me take you back. Because you need to understand the world I came from before you can understand why what happened next felt less like revenge and more like simply telling the truth out loud. I grew up in a family that wasn't really mine. My mother, I'll call her Ruth, never let me forget that she had taken me in when nobody else wanted me. She reminded me of it the way some people remind you of a bill they're owed. Not with cruelty exactly. With accounting. You owe me for existing here. You owe me for eating at this table. You owe me for having a name. My brother, Danny, was her biological son, for years younger than me, and the difference in how we were treated was not subtle. Danny wanted a new phone. Ruth made him return a medication payment to buy it. Then she looked at me, the one who had earned the money to buy that medication in the first place, and told me to earn more. That word. Earn. Remember it. It matters later. I had been working since I was 16. Every dollar I made went into a household that treated my contributions as obligations and my failures as character flaws. But I kept going. I got into medical school. I earned an internship at one of the most competitive neurosurgery departments in the city. I was building something real, something mine, one exhausted hour at a time. Then came the night everything changed, and I mean everything, the kind of change that removes the floor from under you entirely. I was at a bar delivering drinks to make extra money, because my intern stipend barely covered transit, and a man drugged me. I don't remember much of that night. I remember a voice, low and precise, and I remember a black car. I woke up the next morning knowing something had happened that I could not undo, and I was terrified. Weeks later, I confirmed what I already knew. I was pregnant. Nobody knew. I couldn't let anyone know. The man who had done this, I later discovered, was from one of the wealthiest families in the city. His name was Ethan. I will call him that. He was a doctor. Specifically, he was Dr. Ethan Liu, the youngest director of neurosurgery at the exact hospital where I was about to begin my internship. I know. I know how it sounds. But stay with me. Because this is where it gets good. I said nothing. I showed up on my first day of internship and there he was, my supervisor, my department director, and the father of the children growing inside me. He had no idea who I was. I had no idea the full scope of who he was. We started from zero, in the most professionally complicated situation imaginable, and I made a decision that defined everything that followed. I kept my mouth shut. I worked. I was the first one in and the last one out. I carried files up 22 flights when the elevator broke. I took notes with a precision that stopped nurses mid-sentence. I learned the names of every patient in every bed. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't need it. I needed money for my father's medication, my adoptive father, a man who was genuinely going blind, or so I believed, though even that turned out to be more complicated than I knew. Let me give you the real numbers, because this is important. Over the course of 14 months before everything finally broke open, I had given Ruth and her household a total of $34,200 in earnings and loans, $4,800 from my bar job earnings, $17,400 in monthly stipend contributions that never once went to what she said they went to, and $12,000 in what Ruth called emergency funds that I now know went directly to cover Danny's gambling debts. The surgery that I sacrificed sleep and dignity and safety to fund? The one I let a stranger touch me to pay for? The eyes that needed saving? The eyes were fine. My father had been faking the blindness. Ruth had been running a con on her own daughter for 2 years. Not one penny of what I earned actually saved anything except Danny's kneecaps. That sentence. Remember it. Because everything that came after made sense once I understood what it really meant. When I eventually told Ethan I was pregnant, he didn't explode. He didn't deny it. He did something I hadn't prepared for. He offered to take responsibility. He said, and I want to be precise here, you're carrying the Liu family's bloodline. I'll take care of you and the children. Not romantic. Not warm. Clinical, even. But real. And in a life where almost nothing had ever been offered to me without a price, clinical and real felt like a miracle. I moved into his home. I kept my head down. I watched everything. And I do mean everything. Here's what I was learning, quietly, from inside that household. Ethan had grown up with a girl named Claire, his childhood engagement, the daughter of a powerful family, a dancer who had gone abroad to study and was now returning. Everyone in his world assumed he would marry her eventually. One of the nurses at the hospital, a woman named Hannah, who had made it her personal mission to humiliate me since my first day, told me with genuine satisfaction that Claire was Ethan's real intended. That he had only kept me around because I was pregnant. That once the babies arrived, I would be paid off and sent away. I didn't scream. I didn't cry at work. I did not give Hannah the reaction she wanted. I said one sentence, "Thank you for keeping me informed." And I walked back to the exam room. They thought my silence meant I had nothing. I was counting. Because here is what I had started to figure out that no one in that world had bothered to consider. I was not who they thought I was. Not a gold digger. Not a seductress. Not a desperate girl clinging to a rich man's coattails. I was a medical intern with a photographic memory, a detailed mind, and absolutely nothing left to lose. And while the people around me were performing their social choreography, the nurses whispering, Claire's mother writing me checks I refused to cash, Ruth showing up to demand dowry money with Danny in tow, I was documenting every single thing. People think revenge begins with anger. Mine began with a spreadsheet. I had a folder on my laptop. I started at the night Ruth sent me the "You're marrying Oldly tomorrow" text. By the time I was done building it, it was 43 pages. It had 5 sections. The first was titled Financial Record. The second was Documented Threats. The third was Medical Evidence. The fourth was Witness Statements. And the fifth, the one that made Ethan go completely still when he eventually read it, was titled The Night in Question. That section had 3 pages. It had dates, a timeline, and a medical record from a clinic I'd visited the morning after, where a doctor had noted my condition and the circumstances of how I'd presented. I had kept that document for months, tucked inside a textbook, not knowing exactly when I would use it, only knowing that I would. I wish I could tell you that was the worst part. The worst part came on a Tuesday in February, when Claire, who had returned from abroad and was now making weekly appearances at the hospital, always in Ethan's general direction, always in expensive clothes I couldn't have afforded in 3 years of working, arranged for me to be lured to a warehouse. She drugged a colleague of mine, a kind man named Dr. Marcus who had done nothing to deserve any of this, and had him taken to that warehouse. Ruth was waiting there too. The plan was to film me in a compromising situation and show Ethan, so that he would throw me out and Claire would inherit the space I occupied. What they didn't count on, Ethan was already tracking a voice recorder he'd given me months earlier, a recorder that had originally belonged to the person who saved his life 10 years ago, and which he was trying to locate. When the tracker activated from the warehouse, he didn't hesitate. He arrived with people. He found me. He found Ruth. He found the whole choreography of their plan in one room. And I said nothing. I let the evidence speak. The first crack came on a Monday, 2 weeks after the warehouse incident, when Ethan's team confirmed what I had suspected for months: Claire had never saved Ethan's life. 10 years ago, when kidnappers had taken him and left him starving in a barn outside the city, the girl who found him, gave him water, and went to get a doctor. That girl had been me. I was 12 years old, small and dirty, walking back from the market. I hadn't known who he was. He'd given me a voice recorder as a token of gratitude. I'd lost it years later, or thought I had. Claire had found that recorder. She'd claimed the story. She'd claimed the debt. And she'd built an entire engagement, an entire future, on a lie about a kindness that was never hers. She said one sentence when Ethan confronted her: I only borrowed the detail. It told me everything I needed to know. Here is the thing about systems built on lies: they are structurally load-bearing. Pull one piece and the whole architecture shifts. When it came out that Claire was not Ethan's life-saving benefactor, the engagement collapsed. When it came out that Claire's mother had attempted to bribe me to leave, the Shin family lost their social standing in the Lu circle overnight. When it came out that Ruth had participated in a scheme to have me drugged and filmed without my consent, that she had gone to a warehouse to watch her own daughter be assaulted on camera, the police became involved. Ruth was arrested. Danny, who had spent years watching his mother manipulate and sell his sister in installments, suddenly had no one to fund his debts and no one to blame. But the part one want to tell you about most carefully is what happened when I finally learned the truth about my own birth. I had always believed I was an orphan. Found by the roadside. Raised out of someone else's charity. And I had internalized that story so completely that I had never questioned why I was treated the way I was. I thought it was the natural tax of being unwanted. What I learned instead, what the DNA test confirmed, what an old woman named Mrs. Chen eventually confessed, was that I was not an orphan at all. My biological mother was the daughter of the Shin family. The same Shin family that Claire came from. 22 years ago, Mrs. Chen had worked as a nanny in the Shin household. When 2 babies were born within days of each other, the Shin's daughter, and Mrs. Chen's own infant, Mrs. Chen made a choice that she carried in her body for 2 decades. She switched the babies. She left her own daughter to grow up in a wealthy family with every possible advantage, and she took the Shin daughter home to raise in her own circumstances. I was the Shin daughter. Claire, who had spent years calling me a wild girl, a no-name orphan, a gold digger not worthy of Ethan, was Mrs. Chen's biological child. I remember the moment I understood this. I was sitting in a hospital room, still recovering from the shock of what had almost happened to me in that warehouse, and Ethan sat down next to me and said it plainly: your biological parents are standing in the next room. I didn't move for a long time. I was trying to figure out if I was supposed to feel relief, or joy, or grief. What I actually felt was something harder to name. Like a room in my memory that had always been painted the wrong color suddenly being repainted to match. Here is the sentence that explains every family I had ever been inside of: some families are held together not by love but by the labor of whoever they can convince to disappear into the walls. I had been that person. In Ruth's family, in the hospital hierarchy, in Ethan's household when we first began, I had been the invisible structure. The one who kept everything running while being told I was lucky to be allowed in the building. Remove the structure. Watch what falls. The weeks between the warehouse and the formal confrontation were the quietest weeks of my life. Not peaceful. Quiet. The way a building is quiet after the electricity goes out. You become suddenly aware of all the systems that were running in the background, all the noise you'd normalized, all the hum you'd stopped hearing. I went to work. I completed my rounds. I answered direct questions with direct answers and volunteered nothing extra to anyone. People who had spent months treating me like furniture started looking at me differently, not because I had changed, but because silence reads differently when the person holding it knows exactly what they know. Hannah, the nurse who had spent the most energy making my internship miserable, called me into a supply closet on a Wednesday to apologize. She said it wasn't personal. She said she'd been friends with Claire for years and felt loyalty. She said she hoped we could move past it. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "I'll see you at rounds." That was all. No warmth, no coldness, just a door closing. I want to describe the collapse slowly, because it deserves that. After Claire was arrested and charged, after Ruth was processed and held, after the Shin family was forced to reckon with 22 years of the wrong daughter, things fell in sequence. The Shins initially tried to keep Claire in the house, claiming the love they had developed over 2 decades of raising her. Ethan ended that conversation in one sentence. He walked into the Shin living room, looked at Claire's adoptive father, and said, "You asked me to take care of Jiaming for saving my life. She didn't save my life. My wife did. The debt is paid." Then he took my hand and we left. Danny lost every resource he'd ever used to fund his lifestyle. He called me twice. The first call was angry. The second call, 3 weeks later, was small and confused, the voice of someone who had always counted on a particular arrangement and genuinely couldn't understand why the arrangement had changed. I answered both calls. To the first one I said, "I hope you find another way to manage." To the second one I said the same thing. I did not explain myself. He had watched everything happen. He didn't need my explanation. He needed a different life. That wasn't mine to give him. Then there was my adoptive father. I want to be honest about this part, because it is the part that cost me the most emotionally, and I don't think these stories are worth telling if you sand off the complicated edges. My father, the man who had pretended to be going blind, whose fake medical crisis had been the engine that drove me into impossible choices, came to see me once, alone, without Ruth, about 6 weeks after everything became public. He sat across from me in a diner booth and he didn't perform anything. He didn't pretend to have explanations. He said, "I knew what she was doing with the money. I let her. Because it was easier." He looked at the table when he said it. Not at me. "You were always going to be fine," he said. I told myself that. I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, "I know." Because I did know. Not that I was always going to be fine, I didn't know that. But I knew that he had watched, and said nothing, and called it faith in me when really it was permission to himself. He wasn't a monster. He was something sadder than that. He was a man who had chosen the path of least resistance at every turn and dressed it up as trust in my resilience. He was the partial truth in a story full of full lies. I paid for one meal with him. I don't plan to eat with him again. But I didn't hate him when I left that diner. I just understood the full picture for the first time. Ethan's mother, who had loved me from almost our first meeting, who had pressed a jade bracelet into my hands and called me her daughter before she even knew my real last name, cried when she found out about my biological family. Not sad crying. The other kind. The kind that happens when something you always suspected turns out to be even more beautiful than you thought. Both families showed up to the delivery room. That is a sentence I never once imagined I would have reason to write. I had grown up believing no one was coming for me, and I gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, surrounded by more people who loved me than I had names for yet. Ethan held my hand. His mother stood at the door. My biological mother stood next to her, and they were arguing in the gentlest possible way about which family's home I should recover in. I laughed at that. Even in the middle of everything, I laughed. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then: the women who raised me without love, the men who tried to use me, the girls who tried to steal what was mine, they all made the same mistake. They looked at someone who had been given nothing and concluded she was worth nothing. They forgot that when you have nothing, you learn to build with extraordinary efficiency. Every skill I developed in that exhausted, underfunded, overlooked life, the precision, the patience, the ability to document everything and say nothing, became exactly the tools I needed when the moment arrived. Ruth's greatest mistake wasn't selling me to pay Danny's debts. It was believing that a girl she had shaped into someone capable of surviving anything was still someone she could control. I survived everything. I built something real. And the people who tried to buy me, use me, frame me, drug me, and erase me, they are living in the wreckage of what happens when you mistake someone's silence for surrender. I am not done becoming who I am going to be. But I am finished being someone else's structure. Some people learn that lesson young. I learned it in a warehouse, in a hospital room, in a stairwell on the 22nd floor, with 2 children growing inside me and a 43-page folder saved to a cloud drive that no one else had access to. You cannot buy what I am. You cannot threaten it out of existence. And you cannot sell me to any man old enough to be my father and call it family business. I called it something else. I called it the beginning.